Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everybody. It is a privilege and an honor for me today to find myself facilitating this session. And when I was asked to facilitate, I thought it's making my job or my life even easier than what it would have been as a participant and a member of leading a breakaway session. So the facilitation makes my life easy because it becomes everybody else's job just to participate in the session. And just to kick it off, I would like to start by thanking the convener for this very important and timely engagement that we're having today. And that is SABC Education, which has generously agreed to convene this session. We, as the participants and those of us in the sector, are eternally indebted to the SABC for their assistance and collaboration in this important thing. Colleagues, you will have noticed by now that there is a lot of hub around the food systems or the UN food system dialogues that are being convened all over the world. And in South Africa, there's been a number of dialogues, and the public sector, led by the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, under the leadership of Minister Tawoti Diza, has had its own national dialogue and the provincial dialogues, which will feed into the South African position that South Africa will take to the UN for the summit in September in New York. And this is a very important part of feeding into that South African position, where we get all the role players, the stakeholders in the food system, because food system is not only farmers and agriculturists that are involved in the food system. Just to summarize, everybody is involved in the food system. And it's important that today we're here gathered to discuss the issue of the role of the media in information dissemination and what they can do to advance the food systems that we currently have to a better and sustainable food system. And before I forget, I need to also mention the other partners in hosting this dialogue. I've already expressed our gratitude to the SABC Education, SABC2, Living Land, which is also part of the SABC family. We also would like to thank the ARC for participating here. I know it's an awkward thing to say that when you're from that organization. And I would also like to thank the FANAPAN for their involvement in this. And I must add that FANAPAN, to me, is a trailblazer in terms of dealing with media and agriculture. I remember many years ago when I participated in the activities of FANAPAN, they always had a training session, for lack of a better word, for the media before they had their their high-level dialogues all over the member countries, which to me was an eye-opener. And I think they were the first ones in terms of trailblazing in going ahead. And I see here that Professor Lindiwe Machelas-Banda is here, who was part of the FANAPAN family at that time and leading that. It's interesting to see her wearing a different hat today and still participating in what I think it's something that's very close to her heart. And I would also like to thank VKP, Food for Mzansi, and also thank No Line Communication. And thank you for all these organizations for coming together to do this. Without wasting much time, I would like to declare this dialogue officially opened as we do this, as we go ahead and answer the questions that we'll be dealing with as the program unfolds, in terms of what is the role of the media fraternity in the United Nations Food System Summit that we're building up to, and also what is in it for the media. But we will also touch on the other questions that we'll be raising today as we go ahead. With those few words, I would like to hand over to the next speaker so that we can get the ball rolling in terms of keeping our time. And I would like to invite Mr. Taniswart from Genre Manager Education and Children at SABC Education to take the floor. Over to you, Mr. Swart.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kabela. Good morning from a crispy cold South Africa today. I hope you are all warm and comfortable and will enjoy this session. SABC Education, as the convener of this media engagement, together with our partners that Dr. Kabela has already mentioned, the Agricultural Research Council, and then Van Food, Agriculture, Natural Resources, Policy Analysis Network. What a long name. And then also our partner, Food for Mzansi, and thank you to No Line Communications. We would like to welcome all the delegates attending this dialogue in support of United Nations Food System Summit process. As Dr. Kabela said, I am Dani Swart, the genre manager responsible for all educational and children's programs at the South African Broadcasting Corporation. As SABC, we recognize that several national and independent dialogues have been held across the globe, but there has not been a dialogue dedicated to the communications and media fraternity, the very people who are to carry the messages of the dialogues. That is why we as SABC Education thought it good to bring together all the groups today here to understand what a food system is and what role do we as media and communications play within the food system space. How can we help to improve general understanding and promote broader participation in this critical process? SABC Education's core business is to manage the development of innovative and interactive educational and children's broadcast content for all age groups. It is delivered and distributed through differentiated mediums, and that is now like television, radio, online, etc. We further mobilizes the public through social action campaigns and enhances sustainable development for individuals, families, communities, and the nation at large. In our content, we also recognize the Millennium Development Goals, as well as South Africa's 2030 Development Plan. As part of our public service, we use our platforms to keep the public abreast of new developments. We are the continent's largest source of information and education. We set the benchmark for plurality and diversity in representation and storytelling. We are the major broadcast in Africa for children, and we reflect South Africa back to our audiences through coverage of major national and international events. In early 2018, we launched a national awareness campaign by introducing each one of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through our 3 television channels, SABC 1, SABC 2, and SABC 3, and our 14 SABC radio stations to start creating awareness among South Africans. We decided then at that stage to incorporate these goals, the 17 goals, into our programming, and hence Living Land became one of our main vehicles that highlights effective strategies to achieve food security, job creation, eradication of poverty, rural development, and promotes environmental, sustainable, and gender equality. Living Land is further supported by our emerging farmers workshops that we host at agricultural shows in South Africa. We also develop and distribute learning resource materials at these events. And then also our e-farmers portal is an online resource where the agricultural community can get information within all the different fields of agriculture. SABC Education believes in the attainment of a sustainable food supply system, and that is the reason why we are in partnership with the executive producer of Living Land, Nozipho Diweni, from No Line Communications, to assist in just achieving that. Lastly, but not the least, I would like to congratulate and thank the curator, Nozipho Diweni, for putting together this media dialogue, which was really needed. We really do appreciate all the hard work that you've put into it. I would now also like to invite you, our delegates, to view a short showreel on how we support food systems, the Food System Summit, through our program, Living Land. Thank you, and enjoy the sessions lined up for you today.
The global population is expected to grow to over 10 billion people by 2050, which will drastically increase the demand for food and place further pressure on our limited resources. On the supply side, this will increase competition for land, energy, and water, as more food will have to be produced with less resources. Overconsumption and waste further exacerbate these issues and place more pressure on the food system. This means that our food systems need to change to adapt to the changing global conditions to ensure food security for the future. So what exactly is a food system, and how does it impact you directly? A food system includes all processes and infrastructure involved in feeding the population. Growing, harvesting, aggregation, processing, packaging, transportation, marketing, consumption, and distribution and disposal of food and food-related items. It includes all the inputs needed and outputs generated at each step. The food production side includes the farmer, labor, and farming communities, but also includes the input producers and suppliers of fertilizers, seeds, mechanization, fuel, etc., which means it also includes science, technology, data, and innovation. Distribution and aggregation includes logistics and transportation to get the products to the next step in the value chain and is spread out in many forms throughout the food system. Food processing is very broad and ranges from milling of grains to make flour, to home cooking, to complex industrial methods. This also includes food science, standardization, and quality controls. From the vendor on the street corner, to a farmer selling food hampers on social media, to supermarket chains and grain exchanges, all playing their part in the food system. We consume food in a myriad of ways, from eating fruit right off the tree, to buying groceries, to enjoying a scrumptious meal at your favorite restaurant. We all form part of the food system. From organic waste material processing, to manure and composting, recycling and wastewater treatment, effective waste management is crucial to care for the environment. Food systems also exist at different scales, such as global, regional, national, and local, and requires human resources that provide labor, research, and education, to name but a few. Whether you're a street vendor, transporter, scientist, cook, waiter, restaurant goer, or fast food fanatic, you form part of a local, national, and global food system, and as such have a role to play. Where do you fit into the food system?
Thank you very much, Nozipo, for that informative clip that the SAPC has just played for us. I think it now places the discussion that we're going to have in a good position where we understand what we're dealing with and what we're trying to achieve. And without any further ado, I'd like to call upon Dr. Brave Ndisale, who is the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations country representative here in South Africa. Over to you, Dr. Ndisale.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Makabeda, for your invite. I would like to congratulate also, join you to congratulate, but also to thank the convener, this SABC Education, for convening this very, very important and very exciting engagement, the independent dialogue, or media engagement in the UN Food System Summit progress. Media is very critical, and I'm so excited to actually have watched the video, it spoke to my heart, and it spoke the issues that I also wanted to speak this morning. I come from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the institution that actually has been supporting this process, but also along many other UN agencies, in particular the Rome-based agencies, including the International Food and Agriculture Development, IFAD, World Food Program, but also UNEP and many other agencies and institutions that actually have been supporting this process. So as I speak, it's more to indicate and then to support that we as UN are really together with many various countries around the globe to in this process of engagement as we move towards the UN Food Summit and the pre-summit that is already taking place right now. I want to speak to three elements and three issues this morning as I do my opening remarks. The first one actually has really been captured by the video, but I wanted to put the scenario in two forms. The first one is, we know that in Africa by 2050, the population is going to be close to 2.5 million, which is actually enormous and double the population we are now. And for this, we require a radical transformation in how food is produced, it's processed, is traded, and is consumed. To feed the increased population, we require really bold measures to transform the food system so that they can provide decent employment and a livelihood for our producers, our farmers, every actor along the journey of food from the farm where it's produced to the table where it is consumed, so that we can offer nutritious products, healthy diets for all consumers, and do so without damaging our ecosystem and natural resources. But on the other hand, as we speak today, in the moment, hunger has increased. And we have the data from the UN SOFI report that in 2020, we have a devastating, under the devastating COVID-19 pandemic. Compared to 2019, in Africa, we have about 46 million more people that actually went to bed hungry. In addition, the report also highlights that there's a high cost of healthy diet coupled with persistent high level of income inequalities, which put the healthy diets out of reach for close to 3 billion people globally. And I think the number in Africa is also high, especially among the poor, the vulnerable groups. This is actually quite devastating. So the COVID-19 pandemic has likely impacted the prevalence of multiple forms of malnutrition, and this could actually have a lasting effect beyond 2020. High numbers of children are stunting, wasting, and contrary, also overweight. This is actually a burden. So you see the two scenarios that are actually challenging to us. The good news is that there's a response. There's a response. And the response requires bold actions, which are required to step out and up our act in the decade of action for sustainable development goals. And also for Africa in our Agenda 2063, anchored in the Malabo Declaration. That is why the UN Secretary General has called for a historic food system summit, a people's summit, we call it, in September, with a pre-summit happening as we speak. To prepare for the summit, as the facilitator has indicated, there have been national and independent food system dialogues that have taken place in many countries across the globe at regional level and also at national level. People have come together, and it has been government, civil society, academia, private sector, youth, farmers, associations. And I'm so pleased that the media has actually walked along hand in hand with all these stakeholders to share the voices of why food and its journey from where it comes from on the farm to the table matters, and what should be done to correct the wrongs. And so we've seen that clusters of game-changing solutions and actions and areas through a multi-stakeholder collaboration that will transform the food system are being discussed. Let me take this opportunity to commend South Africa for actually have been acted the act, taking into account consultative and inclusive national dialogue and provincial ones, including the independent dialogues, actually one of which is the media today. My second element is the role of the media platform. And it has already been indicated by Swart earlier on before I spoke, that the media has a big role in raising awareness and communicating messages on what and why food system matters to achieve food security and to protect the ecosystem and the environment, and of course, to make us more prosperous. But also, it also plays advocacy role to ensure that the challenges of the food system at hand remain high on the political agenda, but also that solutions are found. What is more touching to me about the media is their role to communicate to citizens on issues that affect them, but more importantly, to empower the people to participate, to debate, to interact and find solutions. This is why in many cases, there have been laid best practices and behavior change in communities due to the media. So so some pathways that I want to mention that the media have discussed that I've seen that actually influence the food system transformation include scaling up of climate resilience across food systems, strengthening resilience of smallholder farmers to economic adversities, intervening along the food supply chains, as we saw from the video, to lower the cost of nutritious foods, tackling poverty and structural inequalities, ensuring interventions that are pro-poor and inclusive, particularly for our youth and our women, and strengthening food environment. Last but not least, where I want to emphasize, it is the changing of the consumer behavior to promote diet patterns with positive impact on human health and the environment. So one of the pathways that the media, I believe, has so much leverage to influence and so much to interrogate are on all of us, the consumers. We are part of the food system. Whether we are policymakers or producers or processors or distributors, traders, all of us are consumers. We consume food. We might not know where food was produced, the farmers would know, or how it was transported, but we know our choice, where we bought it from, what we paid, and how we prepare it, or what we throw away. All that as consumers, we have power. Now, our modern world pressures, the growing population, the growing cities, the growing wealth, and changing consumption pattern is all of us. We are changing the food system. So the media engaging with consumers with better education and access to knowledge, we consumers can make wise choices for healthy diets. We consumers can also help protect the environment. We consumers can also support smallholder farmers, promote urban agriculture, and improve other parts in the supply chain. Because the media is always engaging us. So shaping consumer behavior and collective demand can help change markets and influence the food systems. What we eat matters. Our food systems is our future because we are what we eat, and the media can influence that. So I wanted to share that with the platform, that this is how I see the media and how we see the media that really linking us all as consumers to the all working backwards to the food system. So I thank you, and I would want to wish very fruitful deliberation and the engaging discussions so that we come together with solutions that will actually transform food systems that will be resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brave. Before I call upon Professor Lindy Machela-Sibanda, I just want to quickly add and say, as the ARC, we are highly passionate about these food discussion systems and our involvement in the whole process, because we want to believe that we are at the cutting edge of research, agricultural research and development. And in our view, every endeavors that are aimed at having or fostering a resilient and sustainable food system, they need to have agricultural research and development at the heart of that, to make sure that we have a competitive and profitable sector while we are availing sufficient food, sufficient, affordable and nutritious food for all in the process, and at the same time making sure that the people that are in either coalface of producing this food, the farmers and the agribusinesses, are also making a living out of it. And then what is key is that whatever food system or systems that we are aspiring towards, they need to be based on attempting to achieve resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks and stresses. And there is no better time than now to talk about resilience to vulnerabilities and shocks, as we see this COVID-19 pandemic ravaging the world economy. And agriculture has not been spared in terms of that, despite it having been more resilient than other sectors. And we also should be looking at making sure that we are building an inclusive and competitive value chains, which are also sustainable, to make sure that in the long run, we'll still be able to produce food. And also making food available, food and nutrition security, it should be at the heart of this food system that we are aspiring to come up with as we are engaging in this dialogue. And without much waste of time, I would like to invite Professor Lindy Machela-Sibanda, my sister, to come in and give us the keynote speech, which will bring us even more understanding of food value systems as she unpacks food value systems. Professor Lindy is currently the Director and Chair of Arua Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems at the University of Pretoria. And before that, she was leading AGRA. And before that, she was with FANAPAN, like I mentioned earlier on. But I would like to keep her powder dry and not read her whole CV so that she can introduce herself the way she wants to be introduced. Over to you, Professor Machela-Sibanda.
Thank you very much, Baba Mkhabela, Dr. Mkhabela. Good to see you again. Good to see an old friend, Dr. Brave Disale. And no line, no Zippo, keep flying the farmer's flag. Thank you very much for curating this excellent session. Confirm that you can all see my screen, then I can proceed.
I can see you from my side.
Yes, we can. The presentation. Thank you. I think it's exciting that South Africa has seen it fit to convene and curate a session for our journalists. In most cases, they are gate crashers, they are left behind, but they always show up because it's their core business to inform the population. But I always believe it's even better when they show up with content and background information on the issues, hence my congratulations. I've been asked to unpack food systems, but as I said, after that excellent clip by No Line, I'm not sure how best to do a job that's already been done. But maybe let me take you to what I know best, and that is my grandmother Mayembe's farm. In my grandmother's farm, where I grew up in the 60s in Lower Guero village in Zimbabwe, we lived in a rainbow revolution. That farm had protein, had starch, had vitamins, had minerals, because she made sure that her farm had the diversity of products. It was not a monoculture farm. We had goats, and every month we slaughtered a goat, dried the meat, And the meat was then used as our relish every second day, with every child getting just one piece. We had one dairy cow, and that cow was milked. It was stored at the back of the 1 acre farm, and we would milk it and process the milk into sour milk, amasi, which we had as our dessert after the dinner meal. We had a sweet potato plot, and that was for our breakfast. We had vegetables, we had beans, we had the black-eyed beans, we had groundnuts, which we always processed into peanut butter, which we combined with our meat, the relish, and the maize was for our pap. The sweet sorghum was for dessert. We also had an orchard, which had mangoes, oranges, and guavas. No wonder I've grown up to be a tall, well-head Zulu woman, thanks to my grandmother, who understood that agriculture is about food, and that food has to nourish both her pocket with income, it has to nourish the family with nutritious food, but it also has to nourish the soil, as we always left the harvest in the soil, which we then plowed back so that we could fertilize the soil. Just described the outlets, nutrition. Agriculture was for nutrition, agriculture was for income, agriculture was for the skins. After slaughtering the goats, we always curated the skin so that we could use it as a floor mat, which is where the girls sat on. We plowed back the stover after the harvest, and we always sat and celebrated our meals as we were pounding the maize meal, or as girls, as we spent the evening preparing the ingredients for the next day's food. A lot has changed as we went into commercial agriculture, where we went into monoculture. Maize, particularly in the Southern African region, became the main product for most of our farms. What that meant was that the maize had to become the breakfast pap. It would be light maize. For the lunch, it would be thicker pap. And then for dinner, it's the same pap. No wonder we are ending up with what Dr. Brave Ndisale has highlighted, malnutrition, where Africa has become the museum for stunted children. We have countries such as Madagascar, where 1 in 2 children, 50% of the children are stunted. It's not so bad in South Africa. The challenge in South Africa is more of obesity, which is also related to poor malnutrition, as we are eating fatty foods from supermarkets, high sugar foods, and we are not eating balanced diets. So all this points to a broken food system. What have we done as agriculturalists, as food systems champions? We've gone back to the drawing board and said, maybe we made a mistake. We should be looking at the whole value chain, from the farm to the fork, from the producer to the consumers. Hence the new narrative of moving away from agriculture to food systems. What you have in front of you is a picture that depicts the food system. You've got the producers, but for them to produce, they need to have inputs. So you've got the seed, the fertilizer, the manure, all the ingredients that go, and the agronomy that goes into producing the food. Then the farmers harvest, they have to process that food. They then have to deal with post-harvest management issues. They have to deal with transporting the food from the farm to a storage place where there are all sorts of challenges, and the challenges are at the bottom there, and the train is moving. Pre-processing, transportation, storage, pre-processing and packaging at the warehouses where some value addition happens, marketing, then finally it gets to the consumer. As you can see, traditionally when we talked about agriculture, we were just talking about the left side, which is the producer. And everyone always queried when they asked me, what's your profession? I'd say agriculture. They'll say, oh, so you're a farmer. No, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a farmer. We were involved in the full chain, but we were not communicating it that way. So when we talk about food systems, we are unpacking the whole value chain from farm to fork, making it visible that for us to address our broken food system, we need to deal with all those stops within the production chain. So that's the first thing. Now, going back to food system, I have just explained that we're talking about production, distribution, and consumption, but also the disposal of the food. So no one school prepared us for this. I went to school and I studied animal science. It is no wonder that I'm running a livestock farm. But really, in that livestock farm, there's production, there's distribution, there's consumption, and there's disposal of many other wastes, which are now contributing to climate change, because that's where the greenhouse gases are coming out of that production process. That's where the fossil fuels that we are using in our tractors become a challenge when we talk about the food system. So it's a system that is giving us food, but it's also a system that is damaging the environment. So as you interact, you'll come across terms like regenerative agriculture, where some are now looking more at how do we make good of the agriculture system. So first thing, it's a system. A lot of interconnected systems are involved in producing the food that we eat. Next thing is that it's got to talk to sustainability. Now, we all know that after the Millennium Development Goals in 2015, the United Nations came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them, and every single one of those has something to do with food. If you look at goal number 1, it is about addressing poverty. If you're poor, you won't be able to access nourishing food. You won't be able to access food. Already, more than 830 million people are going to bed hungry every day worldwide. This number has gone up by almost 15% as a result of the COVID pandemic, and it's something we've never been able to address. Goal number 2 talks about zero hunger. That's the direct goal that Dr. Brave Ndisale and her colleagues at FAO are working day and night to address. Zero hunger means no one should go to bed hungry. And what we do with the food we produce, we need to produce more. What do we do with the food that we waste? We need to reduce waste. But most important, we need to safeguard our environment. So the Sustainable Development Goals, if we unpack the word sustainability, it's got 3 components. It's looking at economic, which, as I said, my grandmother understood. We stood by the roadside to sell eggs to get money for things that she could not produce, but her backyard chickens were producing the eggs, and we only needed 1 egg per child per day, and the rest would go to sale. So economic sustainability is key out of our food system. The next thing is environmental sustainability. We need to make sure that we protect our environment. For a long time, when we talk about environmental sustainability, it was a foreign, far-fetched thing, but it has caught up with us because the consequences of not looking after our environment are haunting us. The El Ninos, the droughts, and the haphazard weather that we are witnessing is all being attributed to climate change, which is as a result of bad agriculture practices and many other development interventions that did not safeguard the environment. The third component of sustainability is social. Social means it's about people, and we know that food is central in our social agenda. So when we talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them, in that picture, I've tried to depict for you that all of them relate to food. Pick goal number 4. Nutritious food is critical for learning. One thing that is clear is that as we breed these stunted children, stunting is not just about their height, it's about their gray matter. It means some of them have 50% of the brain capacity as compared to a well-fed child. Now, if you look at countries where 1 in 2 children are stunted, come with me 30 years from today. Can you imagine a country that is led by leaders in their 40s, in their 50s, who have half the brain capacity that all of us in this room today have? That's a challenge. Gender, as SDG number 5, gender equality. That's one that is very big in agriculture. One thing that we know, particularly for us in Africa, is that 80% of the food that we eat, particularly in smallholder farming areas, goes through the hands of a woman, either as a producer, a processor, or the main nourisher for the family. So what are we doing about gender equality? Raising the voice of women, making sure they have direct access to credit, making sure they can open their own bank accounts, making sure that they are empowered with tools that save time and are not laborious and encumbering their health. So I don't want to go all through all 17, I'm just picking some of them. One that also speaks to me is SDG climate action, number 13, maybe number 12 before I go to 13. 12.3, actually, I'm a champion globally for Sustainable Development Goal number 12.3, which aims at reducing food loss and waste by 50% by year 2030. Did you know that 40% of the produce from farms, particularly our smallholder farms, is lost at farm gate? Why is it lost? It's because we are still using traditional harvesting practices. We are still threshing our maize, going through by stalk, pulling out the cob, unfleshing it, separating the cob, and then carrying that to a storage which is infested with pests, which when we try to then process, we have lost about 40%. So can you imagine when we are talking of 800 million people who have no food, and yet 40% is being wasted on farm? We need technologies that can conserve food at production level. Some of that waste comes through because we have no cold storage facilities. When our fruits and vegetables are harvested, up to 40% are lost either through bad roads, they rub off during transportation, or they just rot at the farm gate waiting for collectors. The same goes for milk. So can we invest in technologies at farm gates, solar-driven fridges, refrigeration, that will reduce those losses? Then 13 is about climate action. We can't talk about sustainable food systems without addressing the climate challenge. It has taken us backwards. As we seek to improve productivity, let's also do it in a climate smart way. I'm currently the co-chair of the Global Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, which is a global alliance which brings all the public, private institutions that are working on technologies to make sure that all our new innovations, all our new technologies are climate smart, so that we can reduce the agriculture footprint, which is currently emitting up to 30% of the global greenhouse gases globally. Surely we are bad. We need to go climate smart so that we can be farmers that are responsible, we can be processors that are responsible, we can be consumers that are responsible. If I just pick the example of wasted food, can you imagine all the energy that goes into producing that food and it's thrown away? It means we've used fossil fuel in our tractors to produce food, which we don't consume and we throw away. When it's thrown away, it goes into the garbage field. All that is emitting gases that are contributing to climate change. Yet as farmers, we cry foul that the weather is not playing ball when we want to go into production. So it's all interconnected systems, and it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, let me now transition to the UN Food Systems Summit. Thanks to Dr. Ndisale Brave, she's already highlighted the pitch that was made by Secretary General Guterres. I wanted to highlight that as we are working towards the Food Systems Summit in September, today is day 3, the last day of the pre-summit that have been happening in Rome, but we put together 5 action tracks that will allow us to collate the work that we are producing for the big summit. Track 1 talks about ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all. So food is no longer just quantity, it is also about quality. It's got to be nutritious. 2, it's sustainable consumption. I've just spoken about food loss and waste. We are wasting a lot in the way we purchase, in the way we store food in our fridges, in the way we dish out and don't finish what has been dished out, in the way we dispose food. Action track 3 talks about boosting nature positive production. It's all back to my grandmother Mayembe, where we are saying, can you give back to the soil, which gives you the food? Action track 4 talks about equitable livelihoods, the living income. There are so many people who are still on $1 a day, less than $2 a day. What is the decent living income that can allow you to access this nutritious food? And then action track 5 is about building resilience so that we always bounce back better after every shock. There are so many shocks, the droughts, the tsunamis, the El Ninos, everything that's been happening around us. Shock, food insecurity is also a shock. Hunger is a shock. How do we make sure that those people we're helping can bounce back better? We need to put in place structures that build resilience, and that's what action track is. So as part of the journey to the Food Summit, dialogues were initiated globally, and the dialogues were led at country level by host governments. There was the Global Summit, but this, which you're convening today, is one of independent summit dialogues, and I hope you will post your results on the UN Food Systems Summit website. I would like to share with you highlights of independent dialogue that we convened at the University of Pretoria. Through the vision of my Vice Chancellor, Professor Kupe, he felt that food systems is so important. It touches all of us, and yet it is always restricted to the Faculty of Agriculture. If you are not in agriculture, you care less about what happens in the production cycle in the food systems. So he decided to elevate the game, and he convened a summit for vice chancellors. 54 vice chancellors attended in March, a food systems dialogue, which we registered as part of the UN Food Systems Independent Dialogue. There were over 1,000 delegates who attended. 10% of those were vice chancellors, CEOs, 77% were managers, advisors, and leaders in the community who were keen to hear what is it that university vice chancellors have to say about food systems. Main findings from the deliberations was that there is lack of visibility and understanding of food systems. You'll be surprised at the vice chancellor's level that office has little understanding. It has always been left to the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture. They also spoke about poor governance of the system. The funding for research is always inadequate, and that the training of our students does not produce a broad, well-educated cadre who can then participate in industry. One thing that was clear was that there was need to transition out of this old form into a new way of doing business. What is that new way of doing business? Number one, clearly, as African vice chancellors, they needed to align with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals because they discovered that every one of the 17 has something to do with the food systems and they need to engage. Second, they alluded to taking a systems approach. Rather than viewing food systems and nutrition as a sectoral issue, they needed to open up all their faculty. We can communicate food systems through art. We can communicate food systems through language, sociology, through engineering. Many of the faculties in our universities can all participate in transdisciplinary research to come up with answers on how best we improve our food systems. Also, rather than focusing on quantity, there was need to address the malnutrition challenge. Number four, there was need to engage globally, and this is the time to engage with the one consultative group of international agriculture research centers, the CGIAR, because they have 15 centers that are involved on a commodity basis of addressing food research. And then finally, the Vice Chancellors emphasized the need for research, particularly transdisciplinary research, where if you are doing animal research, you have to make sure you talk to health people, you have to talk to climate people, you have to talk to the arts on how you'll communicate the research, not the traditional way where if you're an expert in one field, you lock your room, you bring like-minded people and you generate results. The research that Africa is doing should be addressing societal problems if we are going to address the root causes of poverty and hunger in our continent. In his closing remarks, my Vice Chancellor, Prof. Kupe, committed to the following, and why he did that is that Secretary General Guterres has been very clear that the summit this year is not just about problem sharing, it's about solutions and commitments to what each person participating is going to do. What are you going to do to transform into sustainable food systems? So my Vice Chancellor's commitments were three. Number one, he committed to being a champion from the Vice Chancellor's office for the Food Systems Summit and to take our messages to the New York Summit in September. Secondly, he committed to establishing a dedicated professorial chair at the Future Africa campus. This chair will be coordinating all research that has to do with food systems research across all faculties, but more importantly, across the flagship institutions, centers at UP, which is Engineering 4.0, Javet Arts Center, and Innovation Africa Center. That way, you make sure all disciplines are talking to the issue of food and addressing societal problems. Finally, he committed to convening every year for as long as he is the Vice Chancellor, convening what he called an Africa Week at the University of Pretoria, where sustainable food systems will be given a slot to speak about commitments for the previous year and the way forward. I thank you, and I hope as you have your dialogue, you'll also end with commitments that you are going to post on the UN Food Systems Summit Dialogues page. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Machelas Banda, for your insightful presentation. We thank your grandmother for giving you insight into the sector, and we've learned a lot from your upbringing. Thank you very much, colleagues. We are now on the session where we deal with a few questions and answers that we just want to allow a few hands to speak. I don't know whether the screen that I've put on there is visible for the participants. Can you see anything?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm just putting those broad questions as a guide to what we're trying to achieve today, which is what is the role of the media fraternity in the United Nations Food Systems Summit? What is in it for the communication specialists from both the state and private media houses and outlets, including social media platforms? How can the media fraternity help to improve general understanding and promote broader participation in this critical process? Those are just broad guiding questions for us to just to ponder on as we deliberate further. And now I would like to call for a few hands, those who want to make comments and questions. But as we do that, we must be mindful that we don't have a lot of time. So I would encourage people to post their questions in the chat box, and those who can respond to those questions are also encouraged to respond in the chat box, so that we keep this dialogue going on beyond just addressing it verbally in terms of raising hands. So I would like to invite a few hands, if there are any, that want to pose questions. In the absence of questions, we'll move on to the next session, which is the plenary session 1, case studies. And I would like to invite Henry Mateus, I'm hoping I said your surname right, who is a senior manager of social impact at the V&A Waterfront. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for the introduction to Lasizwe.
I've been asked to share a little bit of a case study around the market end of the food system that we've been talking about today. Specifically looking at the systems approach that we at the V&A Waterfront have taken to addressing some of the challenges that have been highlighted today, and our market can potentially stimulate some of the much needed shift in behavior, particularly looking at consumer, food processors, restaurants, office canteens, etc. To contextualize who and what the V&A Waterfront is, I would like to start with this image, which is the image of the city of Cape Town in approximately 1950, when a lot of the land reclamation was completed. The city of Cape Town really got cut off from the ocean. A big goal for the developers of the V&A Waterfront was to reconnect Cape Townians with the part of the city that they've been cut off from, and to regenerate some of the downtrodden areas around the waterfront precinct. We were initially established as a subsidiary of what was then called South African Transport Services, owned by TNPA later, sold in 2006, but repurchased by South African investors in 2010. Today, we are a good example of a fantastic public-private partnership in that we are 50% owned by the Government Employee Pension Fund, of course, managed by PIC, as well as Growthpoint as the other partner. I think very importantly, also from a public-private point of view, although our land is privately owned, it's publicly accessible. It is a microcosm of the city. We've got 25 million people naturally prior to COVID that visit the V&A Waterfront every year. It is the most visited destination on the African continent. We've got 25,000 people that work within this precinct every day, 800 tenants, which are made up of big business, small business, a variety of sectors, including hospitality, tourism, a healthy fishing industry, a number of hotels, research institutes, such as the Two Oceans Aquarium, Graduate School of Business, but we are most well known for the retail offering. And what I'm going to focus on today is that retail offering, particularly looking at our food system and understanding the impact that this consumption that takes place at the waterfront has on the broader food system. It really started with us understanding that we are a major contributor to economic growth within the Western Cape. Over the last year, we contributed just over 36 billion rand to the GDP of the Western Cape, and 324 billion rand over a cumulative period since 2002. Our purpose is to create a really inspiring example of a waterfront neighborhood around the world, and this purpose is driven with the sustainable development goals at its heart, looking at people, planet, profit, and ultimately looking at how we as a precinct can use this microcosm of a city which is free from some of the public sector challenges to test, prototype, build partnerships to solve some of the systemic challenges that we face in society. And we do this by creating an enabling environment for innovation to thrive. We focus on a few key sectors, which is evident and which intersects with societal challenges. Most importantly, today, we're looking at the food sector. And our vision within the food sector is to create a locally biased, equitable and sustainable food system, an example thereof which can be replicated at the market access point across the continent. Focusing on what constitutes our food system, you'd be interested to know that over 1 billion rand in annual turnover is contributed at the V&A Waterfront alone to the food sector. 80 formal restaurants and eateries. We've got 3 markets, the Oranje City Farm Market, the V&A Food Market, and our newly established Makers Landing that I will talk about just a little bit later, which all house a variety in scale of food entrepreneurs, food processors, everybody from a sauce manufacturer through to a ready-made food item. Also, interestingly enough, what we're most well known for, our shopping center, 23% of that shopping center alone is dedicated to food businesses. So it's a healthy food business, but more than anything else, it is market access. It's on the consumption end. It is where a lot of waste is generated. It is where people purchase food. And the question we ask ourselves is the consumers that are purchasing the food, the restaurateurs that are procuring fresh produce on a day-to-day basis, the food canteens in each one of our corporate head offices, the head offices of Ernst & Young, British American Tobacco, PwC, Allen Gray, all of whom have food canteens. What impact is that having on small-scale farmers? What impact is that having on regenerative food practices? How are we taking this market access point and ensuring that this drives behavior shift all the way through the food system and enables a more secure, more just and more equitable food system from sort of the most highest end of the retailer through to the dock worker, the construction worker that needs to purchase food on a day-to-day basis at their jobs across our precincts. So do they have access to accessible, cheap food that is nutritious as well? And what we've done is looked at a few key areas of the food system that we can influence. We've established a farmer education program, looking at all of our social programs and ensuring that the food that is produced at those farms are done with regenerative food practices, organic food practices at heart. We're busy, we're actually in the process of establishing a food hub, which is a space to aggregate produce from small-scale farmers, making it that much easier for restaurateurs, for food canteens to purchase food directly from small-scale farmers at our precinct. Behind you, on the image that you're seeing, this is our first foray into urban garden practices. We've established a octopus food garden right next to our head offices, which has since establishment in 2020 produced over 7 tons of food produce that is donated to our food programs. I think it's important to say that we recognize that this won't make a fundamental shift in the food system, these urban gardens, but it's built as a learning space, a space where we bring both restaurateurs, we bring our farm education program into the space to learn. Thirdly, we look at food waste, understanding that a tremendous amount of organic food waste is generated across our precinct, whether it be in the formal retail sector from grocers or through restaurateurs. So we work with partners such as SA Harvest to ensure that the food waste practices are of a sustainable nature. We've also instituted something phenomenal called the Green Lease, which encourages all food tenants to put sustainable food practices, particularly looking at their waste, into practice, incentivizing them through more affordable rental options. So to give you a practical example, each tenant pays for waste management services. But if you as a tenant are sorting your waste at source in your restaurant, you get a reduced rate on that food, on that organic waste item. So utilizing the levers that we have at our exposure at our disposal, to incentivize better, more sustainable food practices. Then understanding what market access looks like and who gets access to that consumer, who gets access to that market that exists at the Vienna waterfront. Understanding that generally market access has come at a very high barrier to enter this opportunity. To this end, we established Makers Landing. It's a partnership with the Jobs Fund to build a space where young budding food entrepreneurs could access a commercial kitchen to scale their businesses. So we built a fully kitted 100 square meter commercial kitchen with high-end kitchen equipment. And imagine you're a small food entrepreneur operating at home and you need food processing equipment, just like a shared working space. There's an incubation program where you can get access to this shared working kitchen that enables your business to scale. We then put market access on top of that, putting market access points such as a flexi market in place and building a ecosystem of supporting entrepreneurs around that. Very encouragingly, through establishing this Makers Landing program alone, we've been able to, just over the last year, create 84 jobs within the food sector alone, predominantly Black-owned businesses, and we're really starting to move the needle on women-led businesses as well. This naturally has an impact on the food security challenges we face across communities in the city of Cape Town. And 2020 was really an opportunity for us to leverage the challenge that COVID-19 has brought upon our food system to look at more sustainable food practices and bring particularly small-scale farmers closer to market, bring them closer to restaurateurs. So we initiated a program called Heart of Filling the Belly, which was a partnership between us, the Runners City Farm Market, there is an Urban Food and Farming Trust, 40 small-scale farmers across the peninsula, and we paired them up with restaurants who at the time had dormant kitchens standing empty because of the national lockdown level 5 regulations. We had the capacity, we had the resources to introduce farmers to restaurateurs, to get them to utilize the produce from those small-scale farmers on a day-to-day basis, and at the same time address a pressing need in communities across the peninsula. We do know that soup kitchens is not the long-term answer, but really creating better access to nutritious food at source. This for us was a real opportunity to think of the long-term goal and leverage the short-term initiative around food systems. We have to date, through this program alone, served over 150,000 meals in partnership with our restaurateurs and small-scale farmers. The big question is, so what? When we look at what we're doing, how we're utilizing relationships with the various different partners, such as Grow SA, the SA Urban Food and Farming Trust, the Runners of City Farm Market, what does it actually mean? You know, in this exclusive piece of real estate at the tip of the African continent, what does this mean, this example of a food system, mean to communities that are struggling on a day-to-day basis to access food? To this end, we've established an initiative called Solve at the Vienna Waterfront. And the purpose of Solve is to take this example, to take these learnings, the research, the knowledge, the intellectual property, the challenges that we're facing and we're wrestling with every day, and amplify that and share and collaborate and build universally accessible intellectual property to implement in food systems across the continent. We are committed to sharing in the value in building this ecosystem strategy to direct that towards solving for some of our pressing urban challenges. This is true and evident not only in the food sector for us, but in the oceans economy, in supporting small businesses, creating jobs, in looking at the future of the retail industry, as well as looking at the new world of work. We're really looking to consult, to replicate, and to conduct research, to replicate that impact in communities across our continent. This was just a small example of how we're trying to utilize the market in food food processing and consumption to stimulate some of that consumer behavior, to stimulate some of that that market access that is required for a more just, equitable, and sustainable food system. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tulasizwe.
Thank you very much, Henry, for that interesting talk that you've given us. I'm aware that we're running behind time, this 15 minutes behind, so I'm not going to try and summarize what has been said. I will just quickly invite the next speaker, who is Lita Sabio, to talk to us about the South African fresh produce markets, communicating the fundamentals. Over to you, Lita.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. I hope you can all see.
Yes, we can see.
Great. Okay. There we go. Thank you for the opportunity to share today. Sorry, I just want to switch off my video. Just give me 1 minute there. Otherwise, it's a bit, don't know why Just going to switch off.
You don't have to switch off your video. You can just
keep going. It's just much easier if I switch off the video. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to share some insight into this really important link in our food system. I know that, sorry, I apologize for this. I don't know why it's not. There we go. I know that I'm not alone in saying that if we all thought that producers and farm workers were heroes before COVID struck, we should now have their names tattooed across our hearts. I'm not an economist nor a farmer, and my background was firmly FMCG and corporate communications. So for those of you who, like me, until 5 years ago, had never walked onto a fresh produce market floor, I thought I would share a little video of the food system that I'm talking about today, a world that never sleeps. And apologies if there are any glitches due to Wi-Fi connectivity. The first time I stepped onto a fresh produce market, I was dumbstruck. The sheer volume of produce that moves and the method that everyone follows to trade and discover prices is absolutely incredible. And I realized that in that very moment, that no matter what I had believed or thought I knew prior to this, that I was standing in the heart of food security for South Africans. So why does it even matter that the public understands our uniquely South African fresh produce market system? We all know the reason we are gathered here today, and we welcome having the focus put on fresh produce globally by the United Nations. Food security is a matter of public interest, and it's important to all sectors, including those who are not involved in today's discussion. But for us, it's more important. It is a moral imperative. Access to healthy, fresh fruit and vegetables for all citizens is quite simply a must. And every night that even one person goes to sleep hungry means that we have to do better. As South Africans, we were made critically aware of this when the informal traders were initially shut down at the beginning of lockdown last year, only to be reopened within the week. Such is their impact on the food supply chain. But you don't have to take my word for it. Here's what other people have to say about fresh produce markets. Wandile Sihlobo says that they are the essential link between farmers and consumers and ensure consistent availability of fresh produce. Dr. Johnny van der Merwe calls them a national treasure. Francois Knowles says that their demise would be the biggest risk that nobody is talking about. And Jaco Oosthuizen tells us that the price discovery mechanism is a self-correcting system and that the South African commission market system is unique in the global arena to ensure low barriers of entry and transparency. They say that not all superheroes wear capes, and this is certainly true. The market agents and workers showed up every day during COVID lockdown to make sure that the food produced by our farmers was available to be purchased by buyers who would then sell them on to the consumers. Francois Knowles also calls them the unsung heroes, and they are. So what is it about the fresh produce market agency model that is so unique? And confession time, this is where I have to step out of my comfort zone and comstrat and crisis communications and into a territory that is way above my pay grade, the world of economics. Basically, the forces of supply and demand are at play, which allows for price discovery to take place and ensure transparency to everyone in the value chain. There are many factors that will impact on that price, such as perishability, quality, seasonal availability, and branding. We quickly notice when prices go up, but not when they go down or self-regulate, and prices do normalize. A great example of this was the ginger price hike we witnessed. Firstly, the price on the market was not what consumers were seeing in some retail outlets. Secondly, as soon as the story had broken in the media, the prices were already lowering. And as we noticed, there was outrage aimed at farmers seen to be earning high prices, but silence when they were battling. Just like the supply and demand signals determine the prices of commodities on Wall Street, the supply and demand signals determine the prices of fresh produce on our markets. And that is why we are known as the Wall Street of fresh produce. This model serves all stakeholders. Some would say it is in fact the only model that serves farmers, retailers, the informal sector, and public and government alike, because it creates an equal playing field for farmers and businesses of all sizes. No one is left out. Which is why what happened on Monday, the 12th of July, sent a universal chill down all our spines. Due to the unrest in KZN, the Durban fresh produce market had to close. I'm not going to share the videos and the headlines. We all saw them and were shaken to our very core. It fed into every fear that we had as a nation, every fear that we had as an industry and as a business. And it reminded us once again that what we do matters greatly. It was a week of lessons, and it taught us that working together was a theme that would govern all behaviors within our own ecosystem. That open communication was essential. We communicated with all our stakeholders. We motivated our employees, we liaised with producers and buyers alike, and even with our competitors in order to get the market open, all the while trying to get the delicate balance between telling our story without making the markets a target. Industry bodies were absolutely critical at this time. To name a few, ARC, IMASA, AGBIZ, APAC, PMA, and AgriSA, who facilitated real conversations with government and stakeholders, working tirelessly to ensure that talk was turned into action. And Christo is one of the people who was at the forefront of this. The Durban fresh produce market reopened on the Friday after being closed for 4 whole days. And kudos to all the team at the market for ensuring that no one was favored over the other once trading began. Big, small, and very small buyers all had access to whatever produce was available. And so it was that in the aftermath of this, we were able to tell our story of what a treasure the fresh produce markets are and how prices were stabilizing. All of which served as a precursor to the important role that media can play in the journey ahead. We all know that the media has the power to create and fuel anxiety. It also has the power to settle nerves. The clearer the information the media is working with, the more likely it is to settle nerves. This matters in terms of public understanding of price swings and public understanding of food security or supply chains. And it is with this in mind that we call on media to visit the fresh produce markets and see for yourself, to hold all stakeholders to account, to ensure that investment in infrastructure of the markets is maintained and prioritized, and that, along with all South Africans, to never take the markets themselves or the price discovery mechanism for granted. The good news is the rally cry is being heard. Last week, John Purchase, the CEO of AGBIZ, called for the recognition of fresh produce markets as key assets and proposed public-private partnerships to ensure their continued success. But friends and colleagues, each of us has our own ecosystem of access to fresh produce, and everyone in that system has a vital role to play within it. But sometimes we need a little reminder of where it comes from.
My name is Welcome Moiba And where do you buy your fresh produce?
Get them from Victoria Market.
And then you come all the way here?
Every day.
How do you get here?
There's a transport that brings us here.
Okay. And do you work for somebody else or do you work for yourself?
I'm now working for myself.
Okay. That's lovely. And do you see me often? How many times a week do you see me?
Every week I see you.
Okay, I'm going to buy something from you. What you got for me today?
I got pears, guava, banana, and nudges.
How much are your pears?
30 for each.
Okay, I'm going to get some pears. See, thank you, welcome.
So I thank you, and I hope that your journey of discovery will be as exciting as mine has been.
Thank you very much, Lita, for the presentation on the fresh produce market. And now I would like to call upon Dr. Nadia Malan to talk to us about izindaba zokudla, seeing the system in the food system. Dr. Nadia Malan is senior lecturer in business management at the University of Johannesburg, and also has this baby called izindaba zokudla. Over to you, Malan.
Thank you very much. Can you all see me?
We can see you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just start the screen sharing, and thank you so much for, oh goodness, now I've got trouble. Oh, where are you? My apologies.
We'll share it from this side,
okay,
Doctor.
Please do go ahead, yes. Thank you very much. I'll just let you know when you need to move it. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm here to talk about seeing the system in the food system. I do not want to engage in any debate with my esteemed colleagues. That's fine. But I do want us to just understand what the role of the media is. I'm not going to address that directly, but indirectly in the end. But let me just hint at what I want to say is the media can open the spaces for discussion, and I appreciate that. And please move to the next slide. But opening the spaces also, takes place within a specific context. I also just want us to understand that all these things take place in very bigger wholes and really in a system context. So what happens is something that happens at one end of the system has ripple effects to the other side. And, the fresh produce markets, Lita, thank you for your presentation. But I think we need to just be a little bit more critical. If you go to the fresh produce markets, you look at the daily prices. Other day I looked, it was 40 cents a kilogram for carrots that they paid. Now, this obviously fluctuates per day, but that doesn't serve farmers. And I think we really need to really be quite a bit more critical about that. Something like a 40 Rand a kilogram price for carrots really creates a lot of ripple effects, and it has systemic effects. And actually what it means is the fresh produce markets or the systems often favor larger producers. And historically, this is where our fresh produce markets have come. I know there are gems and treasures, but there are also, I've had lots of students do research. Those prices can also be manipulated. And this just shows us how systems work. Systems have butterfly effects. A small effect like informal traders colluding on the prices that they pay can lower the prices on the market, and they do that with WhatsApp. So small things can create big effects. And this is how we need to understand systems and how systems operate. Everything is a system, and there are systems everywhere. And yes, you can always see the system, but you cannot see all of the system. Your own position in the system is invisible to yourself. So that is one of the difficulties we have in managing systems in that sense. The next slide, please. So what is a system? A system is made up of its parts. So the whole is always greater than its parts. But what we must understand, that a trader that we saw at the end of Lita's presentation, you know, that person in himself is also his own little system that plays a part in the larger system. So these systems are made up with relationships, technologies, dynamics. There are a lot of models, and we can manage the system, but we cannot control it. You know, governance is a much better a term, and governance is never about command and control, but when you govern something, you are acting or engaging in an interactive relationship with those people that you govern. So it's very important to understand.
Nadia, we lost you. Or am I the only one who lost you?
I don't know. Yes, so sorry. Can you hear me?
We've got you.
Yeah, I can hear
you.
you.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. So, you know, understand that the system is made up of the whole and its parts. But the key thing to understand is that the system and the relationships in the system is at every instance unlike. So what we are doing is we are connecting unlike things are dynamic and they are so difficult to control. And we need to understand control and management of the system, not as controlling it, but as determining how feedback loops will feed into the system and change things. The next slide, please. I would like to take the idea of bucket traders as a focus on the system. Now, these bucket traders function within the context of, often in Johannesburg, definitely, the fresh produce markets. Because the prices are low relative towards retail prices, it enables these bucket traders. Please also note that for everything traded in Joburg on the fresh produce market, the city takes 7% and the traders take another 12%. So it really increases the prices of 60% of all our food by 19%. So that's maybe not such a good idea. And we need to understand that it might be better to maybe have a digital system so the farmer can actually trade immediately with a customer. And we are actually creating a bottleneck in the middle with our food, our fresh produce markets. So what you need to do is when you like linking these alike with unlike, what you are doing is you are creating value chains. And it actually in the value chain where the dynamics take place. So next slide, please. So what we need to understand is that the value chain is how the system functions. And this value chain is more often than not put together by technology. You know, we always think technology is only really nice to have, you know, your cell phone as a technology, but it's misleading to think about it that way. We live in a built environment. Almost everything, including agriculture, is technology that is created by people. So we live in this technoverse, and we are making the mistake of only focusing on one piece of technology, whereas there are ripple effects and relationships all across the whole thing. So if I look at bucket traders, their relationships they sit in goes from the farmers, mediated by the fresh produce markets, but then it's mediated by their own actions. For instance, they mostly use 1-ton buckies, which is extremely inefficient. I doubt if they actually make a good living in this way. So how do we transform this system? And next slide, please. And if we take the bucket traders as a case in point, there are at least two options. The one option is always, which technocrats always prefer, which seems to be easier, which really creates problems later on, is to say, no, it's inefficient, let's fix and create a new system. But you can't do that only from the view from on top. We need to engage with these bucket traders as well and their own stakeholders and actually use the bucket traders as a resource. Because what do we have? We have independent contractors who are flexible, who are responsive, who can do new things very, very rapidly because they are independent. So if we can actually engage with them in a process of reconfiguring the whole bucket trade system that goes also into the informal sector, we have a chance of actually upgrading it to a much higher level of functioning. Next slide, please. So this can only be done by engaging with stakeholders. So you have to engage with them in a very deep sense, and actually you have to suspend the whole system within which they work with all the stakeholders and actually say, let us rearrange all the interests in this value chain so we can create a sustainable value chain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are lots of concerns with the UN Food Summit. Yesterday, the international panel of experts withdrew from the official dialogue. And it is very, very clear, you know, that there's a lot of, I hope you can see me now, there's a lot of a concentration and market power in the food system. And the UN has not included civil society in these dialogues. This places everything in question, and especially from a systemic perspective, because if we want to have systemic change, we need to integrate all stakeholders, recreate the relationships amongst them so that they, in their own activities, create the dynamics that will create a new system. For bakkie traders, it could mean maybe engagement with digital and flexible value chains, so that the bakkie trader could perhaps much better transport from the farmer straight to the customer. The greatest value in the food system is appropriated not by farmers, but by traders, processors, and supermarkets. The farmers are in danger in the food system. If we do not enable farmers to adopt sustainable practices, there is no point in tinkering with the rest of the system. And we will only be able to enable farmers to adopt sustainable practices if the value that they receive back is greater than they receive at the moment, which is less in South Africa, less than 15 or 17% of the producer price share of the final product. So this is where the change needs to happen. And I'm not saying the big guys will not find income here, they will. But it is in the transformation of all the relationships where the keys lie to the creation of a sustainable food system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nadia Malan, for your talk. We are seriously running over time, and my job is in jeopardy if I don't manage my time properly. So I'm going to move quickly to the next presentation. We'll try and tie all these together at the end, just before we go to the breakaway session, so that we have an informed discussion there. So I would like to invite Lisa Bollman, who is the chairperson of Agricultural Writers Association of South Africa and communication business partner for Bayer Crop Sciences, to give us a talk. And I'm appealing to all the colleagues that follow just to try and condense as much as you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we get my presentation up? Sizwe? There we go. Okay, that's starting already. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm looking at the presentations of people like Lita, and you know, so amazing what you also see in the industry. And yeah, thank you for the contributions that all of you have made. So if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm talking on the article angles and audiences, because all of this information that we have is really all for naught if people don't actually take in that information. So I would like to, if you can go to the next slide as well, really just jump into it, because time is short. Why do we actually need to report on food systems? Will people actually think about this? Do they care? And this is definitely a core problem. If we turn back the clock about 100 years, many people were actually producing food for either themselves or their immediate communities. And now people stay in a house and they go to the shop, and that's where they get their food from. So that connection to the soil, that connection to nature, that connection to literally where your food comes from, has really given way to a place where people would rather be interested in how they can make money than how they can make food. Just I'm taking the general public. And that disconnect is where the media can really come in and try and mend the bond that we are supposed to have with the food that we eat. So how do we make them actually understand where their food comes from? How can we impress on them how to lessen their food wastage? Because if we have to look at food produced all over the world, there really is enough food. But almost, I don't want to just generalize, but almost a quarter of food goes to waste, ends up in the dustbin. And wow, that is it really shakes me, because On the one hand, the farmers are like treading water like crazy to keep on producing more food for a growing world population. And on the other hand, so much food goes to waste. We have the distribution of food is not equal, the access to food and the affordability of food. So all of those issues eventually just fades into insignificance if you want to start talking about food systems. People just want to afford food. They just want to get to it. So telling our stories, and if we can just move on to the next slide, telling our stories as mainstream media, and this has become almost a swear word in certain public spaces, is really we have the power to bring trustworthy news, trustworthy information to large audiences. However, with the advent of social media, literally everyone can become a publisher. The moment you make a post on Twitter or Facebook, you just published something, whether it is truth or not, whether it is news or just something out of your own life, but you published. So the role of the media is to really re-establish almost, I want to say, our relevance. Audience sizes and reach can be millions for one person. I don't want to just mention Kardashians, but that's the one that springs to mind. What is the contribution of what they publish? I don't know, I don't follow them, but a lot of people do follow them, and they're definitely not going to talk about food systems. So how do we make sense in this really this wave of information that is out there for people to really hear the messages that they need to hear? And the more people are in the lower income groups, I think the more they should know about the food systems and how they can make it work for them where they live. Things that the media needs to take into consideration: your audience size, your reach. Who are you literally talking to? And this is when the angle really becomes so important. Your influence. Is what you say to such an extent trusted that it will actually change people's behavior? If you start advocating for composting, if you have some food that is going to go to waste, can you, through your media outlet, influence people to start a compost heap and really rework that into the gardens, and to maybe move away from these green deserts, your lawn, to maybe producing some food at the place where you live, and whether you have a very small plot of land or access to a little bit of land or just a little bit of soil, you can garden in pots and produce food. How do we use our platforms to really inform people about that? Trustworthiness, an endemic problem of the time we live in. Blatant misinformation or half-truths. A lot of that has got to do in how food is produced, especially on a commercial scale. Farmers on a commercial scale should not be demonized. I'm really shocked at what I sometimes read in different publications in how they made the bad guys. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there are so many hungry people who would love to have food at an affordable price. And it is not always possible to do that on a small scale. So is social media bad for us? No, I don't think so. It gives everybody a voice. It does make it a little bit more difficult to weed between, it's not read between the lines, but weed between the lines. I'm going to coin that phrase. And I really think we as the media should embrace it even more than we do at the moment. Let's go to the next slide. Technicalities, I'm just going to quickly touch on this. We are creating communities. The moment, and this can be any person, like I say, these days everybody's a publisher. But as the media, we can create communities, communities who are interested in small houses. You want to live in something that's more or less the size of a container, a shipping container? Sure, there's a community for that. People interested in organic farming, there's a community for that. People interested in animal husbandry, absolutely, there's a community for that. And it's for us to also tap into those communities and understand what they want to read, but also what they need to read. So those are really the two where we need to focus on. We need to create that trust. for ourselves as journalists or as the media, and also for your publication. It must be a trusted source of information. To understand and enjoy what you read, that audience, and whether it is an audience for video or podcast or radio or the written word, that community needs to be led on a path where they finally can truly understand all the information that you present to them and also enjoy it. This will make them empowered by the information, and it will also inspire them. And that is a huge ask, but it's definitely something that is doable and that we are doing as the media. Next slide, please. Understanding what you publish is something that I've picked up sometimes in more general publications, where a journalist might be reporting on an issue, let's say it's a market issue or commercial farming issue, whatever it might be about agriculture, and they don't really understand what they're talking about. So they might have received a press release, and for me, this is probably one of the most damaging parts of the media, is when the writer or the reporter on whatever medium doesn't really get the gist of it, and they simply publish what was sent to them. And that copy and paste a culture is something that has a lot to do with the pressure newsrooms are under. There aren't a lot of people left to do all the work. More and more is expected, and short timelines. There's no longer a deadline. If you work for a daily, that's every day at a certain time. This is now immediate. People want that information immediately, and a lot of quality goes down the drain because of that. And if there are any people in the media, or also people working with the media, acting as a source, please keep this in mind. We need to understand what we write about or what we report about. And if you don't understand, read, get to know your subject. So important. Because, and if you can go to the next slide, you need to be able to very simply understand what you write about. If you can go to the next slide, the perils of, there we go. Oversimplification is of course a problem, because sometimes you do need to explain something so that people don't have a question mark saying, but how the heck was that possible? The perils of oversimplification is of course there, but you do need to be able to simply explain what you need to do. I'm just going to quickly go, if we can skip the next slide. And we can go to, yes, this one. And I want to go to that yes, I want to go to that bottom part I said. If you can create a story about whatever it is you're reporting on or writing on, whether it's a feature, article, or news, if you can make it relatable to somebody, then you have the right angle for that audience. If you want to talk about food systems, you must make it relatable to the audience you are writing for, to that community you are writing for. It must be that connection to the person behind whatever story it is, absolutely, absolutely crucial. We can give people information, facts, all the way until we're blue in the face. But what people really want to know is, what did their neighbor do? Or how does somebody in their community use this information to the benefit? Next slide, please. And this is for everybody in the industry, really, who at one stage or another will communicate on whatever platform. This is not just for journalists. You have to hone your skills to become this audience whisperer. You have to read. You have to join groups. If you feel that you really want to focus on agricultural writing, there are organizations like the Agricultural Writers to join. But you don't have to go that route. You can also just join certain groups on social media and just really get to know that audience, what they want to know and what they don't really understand, and is there more work to be done? Find that relatable information. There are tons of stories on the internet, and this is why I say absolutely amazing what social media has done for us as the media. It really puts us into contact with people on the ground. So open yourself up to expand your networks in agriculture, training opportunities, and expose yourself to the industry on a different level that you are working at the moment. Because an expert is, of course, somebody who knows more and more about less and less. And that is it for me. If we want to talk about the media, I'm so thankful for this opportunity. We can chat for a very long time about the role of the media, but time is few. So Back over to the chair.
Thank you, Lisa. Time is few indeed. Thank you very much for your presentation. I would now like to invite Ivor Price to come and to give us his talk. He's a director for food from Mzansi. The new face is going to be talking to us about the new face of SA agriculture. Thank you, Ivor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us, and we're also honored to have played a participatory role in this event. So I've minimized the slides. We'll be talking about the new face of South African agriculture, and actually talks on food systems and equity. And as a bit of a teaser, I'd like to start off just about who we represent, a quote that really speaks to not just equity, but also about food systems in South Africa and Africa. So Byron Boyson is a hydroponics farmer here from Kraaifontein, where I'm from in the Western Cape. And he says, it started out as a friendly conversation. You know, they ask things like, what's your name? What do you do? And when I say I'm a farmer, it is met with disbelief. They say, you are an emerging farmer. I say emerging where to? Unqualified. I don't need your labels. So that really speaks to Food for Mzansi's audience, and maybe as a bit of an introduction, a small video where our team will tell you exactly what we are about.
Food for Mzansi proudly salutes the unsung heroes of agriculture in South Africa. Initially, its co-founders, Ivor Price and Kobus Lawrence, embarked on a 3-month project to tell some of the stories so often overlooked by the mainstream media and broader society. Little did they know that they were giving birth to Africa's best digital news startup.
It's special to us. It means something to us. It means something to the readers we represent. Kind of feels strange calling them readers anyway. It feels like family.
Food for Mzansi believes in the power of agriculture to unite the nation, to heal, to move South Africa forward.
Agriculture is like the big common denominator in South Africa, since it touches everybody every day. And also it is such a microcosm of all the different divisions, and many of the things that are wrong in South African society are just laid bare there on a very basic level.
Now reaching more than 1 million people per month, Food for Mzansi has not only become a leading agricultural news and lifestyle publication, but also a trendsetter, an omni-channel brand that has already won 7 African Digital Media Awards and 2 nominations in the 2021 Global Media Awards.
Food for Mzansi's editorial team unashamedly shares success stories and good news from the farms and agribusinesses who feed South Africa. That being said, they don't hesitate to speak truth to power.
When a Western Cape farmer reached out to Food for Mzansi to tell his story about how he had been wronged by government for nearly 10 years, when I first got that call, it kind of shook me to my core. I also cried with him when he was relaying his emotions, and as a member of the Food for Mzansi team, to actually have played a hand, it makes me emotional. Sorry. To have played a hand in helping him, a big honor for me.
They've never been featured on any kind of magazine. They've never been featured on any type of publication. So when you connect with these people published on Food for Mzansi, that article, they were able to connect with more farmers. They were able to infiltrate more markets. I think for me, that's one of the most rewarding feelings. At the heart of Food for Mzansi's nationwide success is Farmers Inside Track, an exclusive newsletter and podcast to empower the very up-and-coming farmers and agripreneurs that the brand champions.
There's this group of farmers that weren't really sure where they were placed. They weren't big enough to be fully commercial, but they weren't small-scale farmers. They weren't just starting. So we sort of dubbed them the Middletons. These farmers were hungry for information that they weren't necessarily getting from other agri-publications. So it's the how-to element. They maybe have some funding, they just got land and they want to know how to get started. So anything from starting a budget, finding out 10 steps to start a chicken farm. So it's the basics, but it's also enough for them to get going and get to sprinting speed. And I think that's what's important. And it's not limited to one commodity. It's not limited to one grouping. It's not limited to one province. We offer them everything that they need to be able to do what they do best, and that's to grow the food for South Africa. Food.
Thank you. So as you've heard, we unashamedly salute the unsung heroes of agri. We construct new narratives. We slay dragons on a daily basis, and we also go above and beyond to debunk agricultural myths, of which we find there are many in agriculture, and believe it or not, one of the biggest we find is that women cannot farm. We champion the cause of up-and-coming farmers, and we reimagine on a daily basis South Africa's food future, and we envision a food system with people and nature at its center. A bit about our street cred: we've won a number of awards globally, but maybe important for this audience, we're part of the South African Media Innovations Program, certified by IAB South Africa, and a member of the Press Council and AIP. So, Tunisani Kwabe is a researcher whose voice you'll hear every now and then on Food from Mzansi, and he says he loves how Food from Mzansi mainstreams underutilized indigenous and traditional crops into food systems. And he says we are all creating a food system which includes the smallholder farmer, and where these crops that come from our homes and villages are treated with respect. So when I talk about Food from Mzansi, I have to tell you that we believe that strengthening food systems must be an integral part of all our efforts, government's efforts, the media's efforts, the communications industry, greater society's efforts to recover from COVID-19 and to build resilience in South Africa and Africa. We found during this lockdown that hunger is a greater threat to many rural South Africans, and we see that on a daily basis, inundated with calls from people asking us to feed them and to support their initiatives. And this in a country that claims to be food secure, which we are on a national level, but COVID-19 has clearly shown us that there are some discrepancies, and that rural food systems are fragile and even vulnerable to collapse. So what we've done, we have built a content strategy that drives the food sector's transformation, and we do it in a couple of ways. One is we honor the role of, especially, not exclusively, the small-scale farmer in ensuring food security in South Africa, because we believe that small farmers are key to the future of food, and that view is also shared by many leading academic researchers in South Africa and parts of Africa. We try to sustainably intensify the production of safe and nutritious food to meet demand, and we feature the farmers who do that. And we've also farmers who look after the land, the soils, the water, who increase the contribution of local food producers and suppliers, and the reduction of post-harvest losses. And we tried to address some of the barriers, and we address this because we wanted to help to play a role in removing these barriers to truly enhance agricultural development that will ultimately lead to a more food secure nation. We also thrive on digital technologies, and we support quite a number of initiatives and agriculturists with digital technologies that drive food systems transformation. If I can move to the next slide. We believe that gender equality and food systems are intertwined. Without even planning it, we are noticing that Food from Mzansi as a very female face, and proudly so. And one of the first farmers that we featured is Denea Boshamani. She's from Diepsloot. In the article with Food from Mzansi, she says, I always have a lipstick. It gives me a vavavoom. I'm very young and attractive. When I go to the farm, I have to look cute because my farm sees me. When I introduce myself as a farmer, they say, you are too pretty for that. But I've got a brain, she says. Others says, let me touch your hands, they're too soft. My hands are soft because I take care of myself, says farmer Deneo, who was a former nurse. So I'm telling you this because at Food from Mzansi, we believe in making food systems equitable. Too often as media, as communications people, we only focus on the role that women play in production and processing and the trading of food, in making decisions about food consumption at a household level. And I'm not saying that is important. It is very important, and we also do it. But we all have a responsibility to also focus on whether the food system is just, whether it is equitable, and whether it promotes ultimately the empowerment and livelihoods and health of women and girls. So yeah, you can't just talk about food systems and just talk about produce. We have to talk about the diversity of people and the barriers as well. So in closing, my very last slide, at Food from Mzansi, we believe that small-scale farmers are our best hope for increasing land productivity, crop diversity to feed a growing country, a growing continent, a growing world. And we are adamant that small-scale producers must be at the center of the United Nations Food System Summit. We've been following some of the independent dialogues across the world this week, and it's clear in the African perspective that there's definitely a greater call for small-scale producers. I'm not saying the large-scale mega farmers are not doing enough. They're doing amazing work, but the future and COVID-19 has shown us that we cannot underestimate the contribution to food security made by these producers. So this means that putting agriculture and the needs of small-scale farmers must be high on the global and the national political agenda. It must also be high on the list of recipients of investments. Thriving small-scale farmers and sustainable and inclusive food systems contribute to a brighter future, we believe, for rural and urban populations alike across the planet. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. That is our summarized presentation.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for your presentation. And I would request Mbali to close. It says Mbali, but I can see Kukumahlangu there to close for us in terms of why it's important to engage with the media as a farmer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've actually prepared something for yeah, but I'm going to try and be very, very short because I see time it's not on our side. So basically, why it's very important for a farmer to engage with media as a farmer is because we are living in a time where social media is very, very powerful. And my presentation is actually about the benefits of social media. And I really wanted to touch on that very quickly. We need to understand that social media is a very powerful tool, and to be able to use that tool to match it to the people. So we need to be making an idea as engaging as possible and constantly adapting to our audience. And when we're speaking about audience, we need to understand that they are small and aspiring farmers. So we need to be making sure that we saturate them with information, because they are most likely to need the information before they even try something, before they even attempt to look at food systems and the relationship between the entire chain. Whereas with commercial farmers, we don't really need to do much, maybe just remind them of a target action, or remind them of a specific thing that they need to do using social media. So we need to make the messages as relevant as possible to different groups so that we can increase the adoption or response rates. And we need to also collaborate with existing farm networks, because they are there. Farmers are on social media, farmers are not flashy people, but they are sitting with information. And when we look at the current unemployment rate, these are the people that are going to be helping us with the skills transfer to make agriculture a success. And right here, can you go on my next slide, please? I'll just go to the last point because I think it summarizes it beautifully. The Nando's adverts. I remember the Nando's advert because Nando's uses political controversy to market themselves. I know that if something is happening, I'm going to social media, Nando's will have something witty. So that is the power that social media can have an impact on. And I think we need to position ourselves when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to food system transformation, so that we can stay on people's minds, just like Nando's does. Okay, next slide. So here I wanted to speak more that I have there is that we need to reduce information costs. The rapid advancements in technology are making it easier to reach farmers, yes, but the large number of technologies out there can also become overwhelming. Farmers are here, we are willing to participate and adopt, but we don't need to be burdened with data costs and apps that are going to take so much of our time. I feel like we need to incentivize farmers to help grow the sector when it comes to taking in small emerging farmers, incubating them, not burdening them. Also, the next point on how I believe we can transform food systems using media is that we need to strengthen the rural-urban linkages. This is for the rural developments, improve food storage capacity and promote effective food procurement via PDFs. I've noted PDFs here because they are just absolutely amazing. I've seen them work. Small scale farmers whip out their phones and there's a PDF that helps them with the department of post-harvest. It shows them how to cut, it shows them how to wash their crops, it shows them which packaging material is effective, and it also has like a short summary of the nutritional benefits of the crops that they grow. So PDFs are easy. It's concise. We're killing two birds with one stone. When it comes to that, we are promoting food safety, and we are also promoting food nutrition. And the next point that I have here is to ensure food safety and nutritional quality of diets, visual aesthetic. At the end of the day, it's easy to communicate a message by posting a picture or a video, so we as farmers maybe need to come to a point where we have the content. We do have our spinaches. So how about we post our spinach and maybe just write a quick summary on how to grow spinach, the health benefits of spinach. And my next point here is we need to foster investments throughout the food value chain. Media can tell stories with access to opportunities from private and public corps. And basically what I mean here is that it's good and all to tell stories as the media. We have that power, granted, but what good is it when we are going to profile a young Black girl in the rural areas who has developed, let's say, and connected to the right people so that she can advance and grow? And that's what I mean about media connecting to the right people so that we can accelerate and foster investments. My last point here is that we need to support food systems initiative and decision makers, physical and economic access to nutritious food, including locally produced foods. And this is the power of social media, right? Social media is now able to buy local. Not so long ago, I learned that coffee can be grown in South Africa, and we need to support these upcoming coffee farmers. So social media and media can garner support if it is consistent and if it aims to make people aware of food system transformation. Next slide, please. Okay, these are just my favorite apps, and I'm just going to very quickly demonstrate how you can use each of these apps for your benefits. Twitter is where we need to be starting dialogues and conversations, where we need to be posting links of webinars, seminars, Food Summit 2021. This is the app that we need to be using to make sure that people are aware of conversations. It's very powerful. Everything is instant and it trends today. Instagram is my favorite. This is an app that we can use to visually please people. People really want to see what you're doing for your community. People want to see your crops. So Instagram is perfect for that. Facebook is like, incredible. Anything you post on Facebook does have the credibility. So use that to your advantage. The last one is WhatsApp. Farmers actually do have networks. They use WhatsApp a lot. So they have WhatsApp groups based on the regions that they are in. So if we can penetrate that WhatsApp group, we are actually essentially penetrating a community. So these are the apps that are readily available. Let's use them. Last slide, please. Last slide. Can you go on my last slide? Okay, so my conclusion. The conclusion is that I have started Farm Spaces, and it's the first of its kind because it's being able to interact with consumer and vice versa. It has worked wonders. People are learning about agriculture. People are starting to change the idea of what agriculture means, and people are starting their home gardens. And we have also collaborated with Food from Mzansi. So shout out to Food from Mzansi. And my next point here about the importance of media as a farmer is that it changes the narrative and accessibility of farming for the better. 5 years ago, must have been 5 years ago, I thought farming is for a specific group of people. I didn't think it's something that can be accessible. I thought it was expensive. So it's very important that we change that narrative, and social media allows us to do that. Content creation, I mean, I demonstrated with the 4 apps, there's endless possibilities to drive the message across when it comes to transforming food systems, because food systems is the entire value chain. We need to start having conversations and understanding the relationship that agro-processing has to the farmers, policymakers has to the farmers, the market access has to the farmers. We need to be aware of that, and content creation gets us talking. Agriculture brand position. I think I wrote here making agriculture sexy, but I think really what I'm trying to drive across is branding. You know, when we look at Nike, we don't need to think twice. It's exercise gear, you know, we know how much Air Forces cost, we know where to get them. Agriculture needs to start branding itself to be that brand where we know so much. We don't need to, you know, be thinking twice. We don't need to ask questions. We need to be constantly making sure that agriculture as a brand is cemented. That is fostered through awareness and dialogues. And my last and very important point is that it's a cheap marketing tool. Anybody can use social media. And I feel like it is our responsibility as farmers to make sure that we are credible, first and foremost, and we are able to really drive agriculture forward in terms of exposing opportunities when we see them, and making people start being aware of agriculture as a means of a career, most importantly. So I think I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kukuletu, for your talk. I'll quickly move to Mbali, who is going to also talk to us about the content creator economy within the agricultural sector. She is a farmer and a blogger from Green Terrace. Thank you very much, Mbali.
Yeah, so by means of introduction, my name is Mbali Nwoko. So what I do is that I'm a farmer, I'm an entrepreneur, columnist, speaker, agri-blogger, and podcaster. And if you're asking yourself, you know, how do I get time to really touch on these various things that I do in the industry? I think it's pretty much easy on my end, because you know, agriculture is an industry in which I play in, and I'm a farmer first and foremost. And then all the other things that I've been able to do in the industry has just fallen off the backdrop on what I do. So everything that I do in the industry, everything that I do from these various titles is all centered around agriculture. Next slide. So my main business is called Green Terrace. We are a hydroponic farm based in Johannesburg. We farm vegetables supplied to leading retailers and wholesalers across South Africa. And I started Green Terrace in 2016. So I'm a full-time farmer, and this is my business in which I run in the agri sector. Over and above just farming, yeah, I'm a featured monthly columnist. Sorry, there's such an echo. I'm not sure if someone left
Mbali, we're getting a bit of feedback, background feedback. Oh, it's a Kukule. Can you please switch off your mic? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And so, yeah, over and above that, I write for Farmers Weekly magazine as well as Food from Mzansi. And then I also have my own personal blog where I share content and information, or write articles in terms of how to assist people who want to get into farming, whether you're a new entrant in the agri industry or growing or scaling up your business. And what I particularly like about Food from Mzansi and Farmers Weekly is that I write to a different set of audience, you know, and when you look at the Farmers Weekly, the contributors to that monthly magazine, a lot of them are economists, professionals in the banking or financial institutions. And I believe I'm the only actual farmer that writes for the magazine on a monthly basis. So I'm able to provide business information, farming related information from a high level strategic marketing level, but at least it comes from a person who does the work on the ground directly from a farmer. And then with Food from Mzansi as well, I think their audience is very young and interactive and engaging. Like they had mentioned in their presentation, you know, they're talking about a new face of agriculture, and it's a great part to be part of the family as well, to be able to share information, the how-tos, the where to go type of guides for people who just want to know the basics in and around farming. Next slide. And then just, you know, organically, during the course of last year, I started creating content, or video content rather, over and above my writing, in terms of addressing certain challenges that aspirant farmers or farmers who's just entered into the industry couldn't surpass, you know, and that is purely from social media, where people have sent me emails and said, you know, or messages saying, how do I start a farm? How do I find land? Where do I find markets? Where do I go for X and Y? And I thought to myself, you know, there's so much need and demand for this. However, I also started getting a lot of requests where people were asking to come to see my farm and mentor them, you know, in my farm. And what's always so difficult is because people forget that I'm a full-time farmer. I farm in a 9-to-5 and still deal with the challenges that we read about in media, whether it's finance, whether it's dealing with clients, whether it's policies, whether it's strikes, you know. I still, at the end of the day, have people that I employ, a product to reach out to customers who I need to serve, who have very stringent measures and food requirements when supplying to them. So I run a business every single day from a 9-to-5, and therefore I saw that I don't have the time or capacity to keep hosting visitors or guests on my farm to speak about how they can start farming, where to find finance, or etc. So I started creating short clips of videos as a way to teach and mentor people and give back to the community. Because when I started Agri, nobody was doing the stuff that I'm doing in my space. You know, I leveraged off the Farmers Weekly back then to teach me about farming. You know, the likes of Food from Mzansi weren't available then. However, I leveraged off the Farmers Weekly, specifically that magazine, because again, it was the only English magazine that spoke about farming that I could relate to. So these videos were just a way of addressing certain challenges that people were facing in the sector. And I thought, okay, let me just create one clip on how to find land on a farm and distribute it. So if another person comes in 3 months' time saying, Bali, how do I find land? I could always direct them to the clip. And so much so, I've then created a channel where I've housed all those videos, and we've exceeded 1,000 subscribers. And also another thing is that over and above that, I thought, you know, it can't always just be about me giving advice. Maybe let me bring forth certain farmers that I have in my network who could also address certain challenges, you know, because in farming, there's not one method which could apply to all farms. Every single farmer farms differently. And so that's when I started the conversations or Instagram live channel or chats, where I called it Farmers Conversations, and I brought on farmers that I know who are open to share some information and address and answer audiences' questions on how they can navigate their own challenges through farming. So that's how I came about in creating video content. Next slide. Podcasting is one of my favorite mediums and platforms. Personally, I decided to have a podcast simply because, just from my own personal view, I don't like the camera. I'm very much camera shy, despite what people might see of me. But you know, I felt like podcasting would be a fantastic way to also reach to a different audience. So much so because I personally listen to podcasts. I don't watch a lot of TV, etc. I read a lot, but I really every day to my every day, the drive to my farm and back, I listen to podcasts, and that's where I gain valuable information. And so I created my own podcast simply because I felt like there was a broader audience that I could speak to. And most importantly, it was to start conversations around agriculture. Agriculture is not in the mainstream media. I mean, you know, you open a magazine, they're talking about cars, fashion, influencers, or whatever the case might be, but nobody's talking about farming other than the participants in farming, you know, creating and sharing information. But I started to see that through people that engage me and the business conversations that I have with various stakeholders, outside the agri sector but have an interest in agriculture is that they didn't know where to go to just to hear about farming in a different context instead of reading an article about a farmer's journey and success. So the Mbali Moko podcast, which is available on all podcasting streaming platforms, is about having conversations with industry stakeholders, professionals, bankers, financial institutions, people in South Africa, in Africa, across the globe, of, you know, what is it that we do in the agri industry? And so it was a way for me to open my network of the phenomenal people that I get to speak to on a daily basis, and people that we don't get to read about on an ongoing basis, to just talk about a specific topic and understand what is it that they do. And so much so, we've, close to 1 year of having the Mbali Moko podcast. I've been fortunate to constantly be listed as one of the top 100 shows in iTunes under the business and entrepreneurship category. And for me, this is particularly a win for the agri industry, not so much for me as an individual, but, you know, I feel like there's a very, very imperative message that we as participants and stakeholders and game changers in the agri sector should drive and push the narrative forward about farming and agriculture, because a lot of people talk about sustainability, organic, but what does that mean? And I think the wins as well is that I've found that I've gotten a global audience that listens to the podcast, and the audience could be people in Europe, in US, in Asia, in India. And what I found from just interacting with these people who are interested is that South Africa has also become a place of research. If anybody wants to learn about agriculture in Africa, people are firstly inclined to spot into South Africa. And so if their medium of consuming information is through podcasting, my podcast has landed onto their playlist, and they're starting to listen to all the different guests that I'm bringing on, and they're starting to use these conversations as a broader way of understanding what the agricultural landscape looks like in South Africa, and not only across the globe, but also in the African continent as well. We can move on to the next slide. And then I'm also the host and creative director of the Private Property Farming podcast. And I think here is such a big opportunity for any corporates or companies who are watching or listening to the summit right now, where, you know, we have a property, a very well-known property company in South Africa, who's then was able to partner and collaborate with me to create a farming podcast. And, you know, I've mentioned private property a couple of times, just innocently so, on the videos where I said, if people are struggling to find land, go into private property, search farm for rent, land for rent, etc. And so we've been running the podcast for a few months now. It is every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. And I think the opportunity here for companies is to say that as much as for any people in the role of media, PR and comms for large corporates, I think there's an opportunity for you to also create your own content and educate your consumers at the end of the day. And so this is what we do with the Private Property Podcast. We bring industry stakeholders. It could be farmers, people starting food gardens, because not everybody wants to farm. Some people just want to grow food for their own personal consumption. Not every small scale farmer wants to become a commercial farmer. They're pretty much happy farming on half a hectare, feeding their own family and well as their immediate community. So it's different conversations, different to what the Mbali Moko podcast has. And it's, again, bringing agriculture to the fore, educating the consumer, letting them know who are the participants in the agri value chain, who create these food systems that we're talking about today. Next slide. I think just to touch on just basically saying the opportunity for companies to really create credible information is that firstly, you need to know your audience, do a lot of research and come from a place of authenticity. So for me as a farmer, it's sharing my journey, my story as how I've started farming, the challenges that I've had to having to navigate and so forth. And I think the role that media and communications has to have is also grow with their audience. You know, the farmer that you were speaking to 5 years ago might not be reading your magazine today. Maybe they want to listen to podcasts. They might not be a small scale farmer. Maybe they might have digressed to processing. And so I think there's an opportunity to constantly move and evolve with your consumer. And then you can move on to the next slide, but also having the importance of educating, informing people, backing that up with data and research, and also have diversity in storytelling. I think that's a message which Food from Mzansi was saying is that we're not only profiling a certain group or demographic of farmers, but we're diversifying the change makers in agri, small scale, large scale, people who play in the food system. And I think there's an importance in creating diversity in how the face of agriculture looks like, especially in the South African context, as well as collaborations where companies can work with farmers to understand how their products work on the ground, etc. And how do we inform and educate a different audience that you would not have access to ordinarily. But yeah, that's it for me. I know it was rushed, but I hope I was able to make a contribution. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much, Mbali, for your interesting talk. That was a good way of ending it, because there's been a change of plan. We are no longer going to breakaway groups, and we would sincerely like to apologize for that. But we, as the organizing team, have regrouped and thought it's better now to open a question and an answer session, just to open the dialogue for people to talk. So instead of going to the breakaway sessions, I will open the floor for people who've got inputs, questions, and then we can provide responses collectively. If it's directed to a particular presenter, we will then direct that question to that individual to respond. I must again apologize for changing the program like this, but we really wanted to cover everything that we can cover today, and even come up with a summary that we can then generate and broadcast widely and contribute towards the summit itself. So we are suggesting that we're not going to the breakaways, but I'll open a question and answer sessions. Thank you very much to all the presenters, and thank you very much to the participants. Now the floor is open. After that, I will quickly summarize 1 or 2 minutes, and then I will hand over to Dr. Chili Matibanzela, just to give us the summary and closing at the end. Thank you very much. The floor is open.
I would like to ask a question, but I'm struggling to raise my hand here.
I can see you, Enrique, you can go on.
Okay, thanks. I've also been participating a bit in the pre-summit events and listening in, and just, you know, in my circles and farming circles in general, I don't find a lot of people actually on the ground, you know, farmers that interested in the food system, and that's coming from producers themselves. So I'm just wondering, what should our target audience be in terms of the food system, and how can we almost simplify the importance of the food system to our commercial farmers and the people on the ground, not just our scientists?
Thank you for that input, that question. More of a comment, and I can see Nadia wants to respond.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mkabela. I just want to maybe say that the way we could think of the system is in terms of 2 categories. One is actors and the other one is stakeholders. So in a sense, everyone is a stakeholder. So, but it also depends on where do you draw the lines of the system. And it's good to kind of think inclusively in that way. But then the actors are those who really take action, who shape the system. You know, they have a little bit more of an advantage. There's maybe the content creators that Mbali was talking about. So this might give you some idea of how to conceptualize, you know, in an abstract way, the audience in the food system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input. I think it's helpful. It's really helpful, because the whole idea is to get both stakeholders and the target audience, actually everybody participating in the food system, because as it was said in the opening sessions, that we all in one way or the other participate in the food system. Any other input, question?
I was actually commenting or applauding, you know, the prescience of seeing that we are now standing in between lunch.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's also quite important to think about a system because it empowers one to see your own role in it, and it is impossible to be outside of the system. And you know, something like media and communication is actually a really important part of democracy, not only in practice but theoretically. You know, the idea that you could have a round table, King Arthur's round table, where everyone can speak unconstrained, and every voice has an opportunity to it is impossible to achieve such a thing. But this idea really drives, the role of the media in a democracy. And I'm thankful for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Malan. I think on that note, because I can tell that there aren't any more input and questions coming in, I'll just render a short, succinct summary of what I understood the proceedings to be today before Dr. Chilidzi comes in with his closing remarks and summary at the end. Colleagues, it's been a very informative session, and I once again thank everybody for participating. What came out clear for me is that you can never really overemphasize the role of the media in the food systems and how we can change it and influence it in a positive way going forward. And what also became clear to me is that when we talk media, we're not just talking journalism. We're talking beyond just journalism and writing a story, but we're also talking about how do we communicate to a bigger audience and what kind of media that can be used to actually reach different stakeholders and different groups that we will be targeting with the messages in the food systems that we're trying to make sure that they're resilient, they're sustainable, that there is enough affordable food, nutritious food for all, and also inclusive and competitive value chains in the food system. So it just really come clear that all of us have a role to play, from the journalists in the house, the media on issues that pertain to the food system. They report from a position of having sufficient information to even have an opinion on the content that they get. The scientists, the farmers themselves, other than just what has been said. And I really think that is taking shape, because I have been involved in the space a bit in terms of cultural sector in South Africa and food system. And I really want to see that there's an understanding of the societal importance of food and agriculture. And for having convened this and outlined with SABC, that is your ARC, your Living Land, FANAPEN, Food from Mzansi, to the summit in September at the UN. Thank you very much. I would really like to hand over.
Moderating to this program. However, as my dedication and thanksgiving to our partners, let me start by saying thank you so much to the SABC, specifically SABC, Food from Mzansi, No Line Communication, and last but not least, FANAPEN, which I represent, of valuable members of the media who are in attendance here. And some of them will provide an opportunity for them to share their case studies, who are the bedrock of our African agriculture and food systems. Before I go too far, let me apologize for us going beyond time, and also for adjusting. didn't get to our breakaway sessions to deliberate on issues and to come with the way forward in terms of how then do we make sure that the African case here being no line communication and Mzansi and Food from Mzansi then to be part of the discussions today. For that, I really appreciate the SABC for opening its doors and engaging our private sector players who are in the media space to come and play this critical role. To also emphasize here to say, it is even more touching to see the media practitioners extending their embrace to agriculture research and related policy institutions. And then we as ARC and FANAPAN, we really appreciate that we are now engaging more with intermediaries, which we think that they will bring value in terms of how then do we best disseminate research-based results to the ordinary audience who are out there. Our research-based evidence will not be complete if we don't go to the extent of making sure that the research evidence we generate is embraced by the ordinary person who is out there, and they use that in terms of household decision, community decisions, and also in terms of how best can our research-based evidence influence the policy. Second, as part of the three things I'll talk about, is that I am grateful for the way in which the food systems have been unpacked here. My former CEO, Professor Dr. Lindwe Sivada, then managed so well in terms of unpacking the food systems and its components. And when she started in the introduction, then I had so much wish that then I grew up in the lower Gweru where food was of abundance, traditional indigenous way were being deployed to make sure that food systems is sustainable, and within the communities, then communities were sustainable. I'm so confident that her delivery today and the subsequent deliveries from the case studies has also brought bear in terms of what are the challenges, but most importantly, what are the solutions that we really need to implement to make sure that we deliver positive nutrition and health outcomes. What I need to emphasize here is that then let's not be only engaging in this process as a build up to the September event, which is coming. But I will want to encourage us to say, there are certain things that as individuals, as institutions, we can now start to implement to make sure that we now move towards to transforming South African agriculture and food as systems which accompanies it. So it is for ourselves to make sure that we bring the change which is required for making sure that we are delivering on one, positive nutrition outcomes, and that we have got enabling policy environment that accompanies this and the investment that goes with it. Third and last, and which is most important, to my colleagues who constitute the media fraternity, I want to emphasize that the baton has been passed up onto you. And for me, a lot depends on how you handle this crucial part of the relay. This stage of the relay, I call it a homeward run. So for you, it's about then how are you going to complete the race and finish it well? What you will do from now will determine indeed how we have made our contribution. For me, it will not be enough if we don't engage Alfios from Chakuma or Madlamin from Soweto in terms of engaging with this debate. Your role is to make sure that those people that are disenfranchised are part of the debate. With these few words, colleagues, then I thank you so much. Again, I apologize for going above time. However, I appreciate the adaptive management that we deployed today to make sure that we stay between time. So thank you so much, moderator, and I give back to you all the due respect in terms of closing the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chiliti, for those encouraging words. And we really thank you everybody, and thank you everybody for staying with us until the end. And this now brings us to an end of the dialogue. I don't know whether I can see Nomvelo with hand up, or you're saying you're agreeing with us. Yes, on that note, I was saying this brings us to an end. I'm not sure whether the convener, SAPC, wants to have a parting shot. I want to offer them that opportunity to close the session, or even if it's the team that's organizing from that side, they can close for us. But Tani, you're at liberty to close for us.
Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity. I didn't expect it, but I really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you so much to all the delegates that tune in to this media dialogue that we had today. We really appreciate that, and we hope you will take the messages from this media dialogue further and onto the ground, because that's what we as SABC Education does most of the time, and that we will continue to improve on how we can get the messages out to all the people of South Africa. But also a nice thing about this media dialogue was the fact that we had international delegates attending, and they would then also know and see and be able to talk about what we do, and we as South Africans are trying our best to do, and to live up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and to our own 2030 development plan. And especially now with COVID that's hanging over every single person in the world, we need to look at these things. We've seen it, that with COVID, the hunger, the malnutrition, everything is increasing. More people are suffering from not being able to eat. And it's heartbroken, it's heartbreaking to be able to be exposed to that. And you wish you could do so much more for people all across the world, and especially in Africa as well. And that's why, and also for all our team that have done the presentations, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the time and effort you've put in to prepare the presentations for this session. And please make contact with us. We've seen on the chats that some of you would like to have more information, that you would like to have the presentations and the recording. And I do believe Nozipu, as a curator of this, will be able to assist you and make the presentations and sessions available to you. So from my side, from Danish Swart, a representative from SABC, I really thank you all. I really enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Danny. And once again, thank you, colleague. Thank you, Nozipo. I think I've ended my lunch now. Thank you.